Welcome to Suddenly Different, where we explore stories and strategies for life when it doesn't go to plan. I'm Leigh-Anne, inviting you to join me on this journey. What happens when you fall literally from life as you knew it? In today's episode of Suddenly Different, I'm joined by the remarkable Vicki Tyler. Her story reads like a cinematic drama. Airlifted from a remote Northern Territory gorge after a near-fatal accident, confronting her fear of heights by leaping off a bridge in a bungee harness, and then when she thought she was finally back on solid ground, sleepwalking out of a first-floor apartment window and breaking her back again. But this isn't just a story about physical trauma. It's about the emotional landscapes that shape us. Vicki grew up watching friends experiencing life-altering events in their teens. She questioned the rules early, broke through gender bias before many dared, and led from a place of deep curiosity about herself, about people, and about what it means to truly rise when life pulls you under. From emergency extractions and conscious leaps to unconscious fails, this episode is for anyone who's ever asked, how do I keep going when everything breaks? Vicki, welcome. It's so amazing for you to be here today.
This is a treat. I really appreciate you having me on.
It's so wonderful meeting people from other countries and realizing that there is actually similarity in how we've overcome things to get to where we are. And when we're in that trauma, illness, sudden space where things are different, we forget that we've done it before. We've got over struggles and we can rise. So for the listeners today, I would love you to share your stories from as deep as you'll go to tell them that they've got this. And just like you, they can do amazing things and impact lives everywhere.
I love that.
So before it all changed, well, before one of your changes anyway, so what was life like before you went to the Northern Territory and found a gorge?
Well, can I just touch on something that you said in
Yeah.
your beginning, is that I do believe, as much as, a lot of us, certainly in Australia and New Zealand that are listening to this, we're big travelers. And the more I've traveled around the world, I've realized the more similar we are than we are different when it comes to sort of the human condition and navigating things. But yeah, so I grew up in New Zealand, and then when I was 18, I went off on a backpacking trip. It was meant to be 4 months: Sydney, Queensland, Bali, Perth, and home. And 5 years later, I found my way back to New Zealand, because for those of us that I think it was more common then to go backpacking and make the pilgrimage to the motherland with the 2-year working visa in the UK. But yeah, I grew up in Auckland with a family of 4 kids. My dad had his own construction company. Life was really interesting. I had a couple of whoopsies in my teens, and I think that was part of the reason I was actually quite happy to go backpacking. I didn't go to uni then because I didn't know what I wanted to study, and I was kind of done with school. So I do like the fact, because we've just lived 20 years in the States, that certainly in Australia and New Zealand, it's still very respectable to, go and get a job when you leave school, or go backpacking, or go to a trade college, or go to university, or any number of options, whereas the US tends to be a little more singularly focused that, university is where you need to head. But yeah, no, so I was backpacking for 5 years, and literally about 4.5 years into it was when I found myself in Ormiston Gorge.
And tell me about that day. Were you climbing? Were you just climbing up on rocks, or were you on a path, or
Yeah, so
did you have a guide?
so It was about a 15-minute drive basically from Alice Springs. You go 130 kilometres west, and it's the end of the Tarsio Road, and that's where it goes out to a lot of the Aboriginal communities. So it was the last place you could get petrol. There was the Glen Helen Lodge has, yes, just accommodation and a beautiful little restaurant called Cloudy's. I'm not sure if it's still there. And then one of the sightseeing options was to go, you could go helicopter riding or to climb around in Ormiston Gorge, and there's a big track on the top. And I was walking with a friend, and I realized, I've got to get back for work for a shift. I was working in the restaurant, and we saw this big family coming. We're like, you know what? Let's just skittle down and go down into the gorge, because it looks like, for anybody that hasn't been there, it looks like the whole mountain range is sort of fallen over. So it makes these very natural looking steps. And I was very mindful that there had been a school group from Melbourne actually that had been up there 3 weeks before. And some of the kids had been scampering around, dislodged some rocks, and boulders had fallen down. And one kid got knocked down into the river and died. And another one got really badly hurt. So I was very mindful that it was a little bit precarious. So I just said to my friend, hey, how about you wait here till I get down to that, that ledge. I took one step and I felt myself go. And I can still remember what happened in my head is that as I started going over the edge, and I had my hands up behind me and I was getting up speed and I was trying to grab anything, but it was that very brittle, shiny red rock, which is very slippery. And there was tiny tufts of grass, we're not talking about like maybe 1 or 2 centimeters high. And there was nothing to grab. And then I remember thinking, to this day, I can still remember thinking, oh my OMG, this is it, because there's no way I'm surviving. And then I just passed out at some point when I was on my way down. It would have taken less than 3 seconds to hit the bottom. And it was about 50 feet. It was dry. So it was just rocks down there. My friend said that he doesn't remember getting himself down when he just saw me disappear. And when I woke up, I could hear him yelling for help. He'd run, and then when there was a lake and he was yelling to people he could see near the ranger station. And he said it was the weirdest feeling. Even now it makes my stomach feel uncomfortable when you're yelling help and you really, really mean it. So he called for help. There was a lot of miscommunication between Alice Springs and where we were. And in the end, the sightseeing helicopter where I was working came into the gorge and landed. And an ambulance had arrived, so there were paramedics, and I can remember them cutting off my jeans, and I'm like, no, not my good jeans. So something happens when, 4 hours, there was so much adrenaline pumping through my body. Anyway, they strung me up. The helicopter pilot didn't realize it was me. There was so much blood and all the rest. We had no idea what was wrong. I thought I might have broken some ribs. So I was having a bit of trouble breathing. But anyway, I got airlifted by the chopper out to the parking lot, and then an ambulance journey back into Alice Springs, into urgent emergency, where they sort of scrubbed out my skull and cleaned me up. And I was still pretty pumped up at that point. I'm sure they'd given me something for the pain. And it was the next day that they said to me, we're flying you down to Adelaide with the flying doctors to the Royal Albert, to the spinal unit. And that's when I think I broke down. And they started to explain what was wrong. Yeah, and it turns out I had a massive amount of trauma going on in my body.
Wow. Wow.
So it was interesting that I feel for my mum, like the call she must have got in the middle of the night from the doctors, they sort of stabilized me, and they said, look, we have Vicky here. She is in a serious condition. She has multiple skull fractures. She's paralyzed on the right-hand side of her face and has no hearing. She's conscious at the moment. She has breaks in her, fractures in her neck, 3 fractures in her pelvis. She's got a broken leg. We're taking her to the Royal Albert Spinal Unit. When can you come? So she flew in pretty quickly, and the doctors, there was real, they were unclear. There was no consensus about whether I would walk and hear and see again the same. And so that 3 months that I spent in that spinal unit was probably the most profound period of my life, where I learned lessons in my 22 that a lot of us don't get until our 40s and 50s, perhaps when our parents start passing away, you get closer to mortality. And so I think that what happened is that there was a 12-bed ward, and I was the only one in the ward at that time that still had use of my hands. All the other patients who ended up there overnight were quadriplegics. So they put me in a room on the inside because I could still ring the bell for a nurse. So I was flat, and they were not going to operate. We just needed everything to mend as best as it could. They had decisions not to operate on me. And to give you an idea, so my mum, all the relatives would hang out together and my mum would come back and report. There was a young guy that came in a couple of nights after me. He had been driving around the roads of Adelaide with his mate, and the cops off-roaded their vehicle. So they went back and they hot-wired it, and they was hooning around the streets and slammed it into a wall. And he hit his neck and became a quadriplegic immediately. So when he came in and there was bells and nurses and doctors and everything, the story was that he became conscious and said, "What's going on? What's going on?" They said, "Look, you've been in an accident." He's like, "I can't feel my legs." He's like, "You've hurt your spine." He's like, oh my God, that's it, right? I'm like paralyzed. And he's like, "That's it. I'm going." And he flatlined and they brought him back. And then he went through the stages of death, the denial, the loss. And for me, why this was one example of where I just got such an insight into how a small period of a portion of people on the planet who are living every day like you and I, suddenly their life has changed forever. He would ask his mother to lick his face, and that was very hard for his mum, but it was the only place he had any feeling. And he'd been a sort of a heavy goth, metalhead, never had very sullen, had smoking a lot of weed, hadn't smiled in years, and then he started to smile and laugh. It was doctors back then with the EQ of what we did back then said to his parents, it's like, if you don't have a strong marriage, guys, 6 months is the average. Like, this was a very confronting as I hear all these stories. So I walked out of there defying all the doctor's prognosis 3 months later, but the people who had become friends would never walk again. That was where I got to access very deep levels of empathy and connection I didn't know I was capable of feeling. And these are accessible to all of us. So in a way, I sort of pose this to people I work with. It's like, why don't we access these? And it begins with curiosity, because I had a lot of time to think, and I would get very curious about what their lives had been like before, what their lives would be like, and became very comfortable with asking questions. I think when you're direct and fearless and respectful and you ask questions, it's amazing what people will tell you and share with you. Yeah.
Did you notice that you were really living in the now when you were in the hospital during that 3-month time? So you were, rather than sort of thinking about the future in that you didn't know what it was going to be.
Mm. Very much so, very much so. I was very, very, very focused on healing.
Yeah.
So I had read books at that point in my life about healing, about the power, the ability we have through various techniques of the mind to help heal. And I was engaging those on a daily basis throughout the day. In fact, they got me to speak to other patients. They wheeled my bed over. There was a guy who was having trouble. And, my mum brought me a scalpel and glue. And I'm doing this all sort of upside down for the most part, but making positive signs. And I was, making cards and things for people. And I would make them for some of the other patients as well. And that kind of thing helped me stay in a very, very positive space when I knew that I was not paralyzed permanently, and so I was determined to get out of there as quickly as I could. Yeah.
So did you end up from that episode? Did you end up with any permanent irregularities in your brain, or with your hearing, or with your mobility?
Yeah. The biggest one was my pelvis was broken in 3 pieces, and one of the bones they just knitted like this. So they said to me, and I was 22, look, when you have babies one day, if that happens, you'll probably need C-section, which I did have twice. And I just, the other little things, I consider myself a very small, negligible compared to what it might have been. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And I think the ability to help others in the ward to, give them hope, if they were seeing you with hope, then, that would have helped them. So
And it was actually
having
really,
that helping way.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I grew up in a family where we had a very big pay it forward culture in the community and all the rest of it. So I wasn't actually thinking, it wasn't a conscious decision, other than I think where it really stemmed from was, my mom and other relatives would hang out together. And for most of the people there, right, they were trying to adapt. Can you imagine, having to work out, okay, when we go home, we need ramps, we need different bathrooms, we need, like, everything is going to change. So there was a lot of those patients were really struggling mentally. It was actually the relatives of the patients that would talk to my mum, and they're like, hey, maybe she could. I was like, oh my God, if I could do anything to help anybody, like, I would really find that very extraordinary and rewarding.
Totally extraordinary.
And I think when you're 22, right, you don't know what you don't know. So I wasn't shy about helping at that point. I was like, yes. And we were all of us, I'm talking about the relatives, the patients. This was new to all of us except for the staff I had nothing to do with nurses or hospitals prior to that. And oh my gosh, nurses, the most amazing, I think some of the most amazing people on the planet. And not recognized for the work that they do. And here's, this was interesting. I was 22 and I was, being showered flat on my back with a male nurse. Like this was really, really uncomfortable. So I learned a lot of like, okay, I just got to leave my dignity at the door because these are, professionals that just do what they do. And this again was a world I had not been exposed to. So a lot of respect for particularly nurses I developed in that time.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I know different experiences I've had in the hospital system is it's a job for them, right? And the wonderful ones that do it with love and empathy and, that's amazing, but it's a job for them. So they don't see us like, as a romantic partner or anything. They see us as somebody who needs a bath,
Oh yeah.
which is it can be a little confronting if you've got a story in your head that doesn't understand that.
Yes, and I would imagine that they probably would not give a male nurse bathe a female patient now. Like when I think back, I think that was kind of a little bit odd. But there were specialist, I guess, nurses that worked in the spinal unit, and
Yeah,
whoever was on shift.
I can understand. And I apologize to everybody if you are hearing next door mowing his lawn. Never heard him mow it before, but today he is. When we go on to that, we've gone through the mortality, right, at a young age, facing unknown future, right? So then 3 months you leave hospital. Then did you go back to New Zealand or?
Yeah, so that was the tail end of my backpacking days. And so, yes, I ended up back in Auckland. So after 5 years leaving, and I need to get a job. So I hung up my backpack and I got my first real job with Flight Centre. That was a teeny little company back then. They only had 8 retail stores in New Zealand and 30 in Australia. And so I started as a travel agent and it was great. I loved it. And my life was pretty much on autopilot. I didn't reflect too much on my accident at all, really. So I would party hard with friends on a Friday night. I would jog on a Saturday. I would sleep in on a Sunday and rinse and repeat. So I think probably a lot of people can relate to family members or teenagers or young adults that are just kind of like cruising. And that was me until literally something snapped me out of it one day. So I'm happy to share with you that story if that's.
Yeah, well, is that deciding to face your fear or is that something else?
So that was what had happened. I had realized over the 18 months since I left that hospital was I'd started to develop a fear of heights. And I was the kind of person that would do anything, go anywhere, and very sort of adventurous. So this bothered me immensely. And so I decided to go down to Queenstown and do a bungee jump because for anybody that hasn't been there, I like to describe Queenstown as kind of like Swiss Alps meets Red Bull, like high octane sports on tap everywhere and beautiful little mountain town in the south of the South Island of New Zealand. So a friend came down with me, do the bungee jump to kill or cure. I felt like this fear of heights. The bungee jump, for anybody that hasn't done one, I mean, it's extraordinarily exhilarating, right? As you go, like there is no way not to pretty much scream your head off as you're going down. It's just a mind-blowing experience. And it was exhilarating. I felt like I faced the fear. I like walked away stronger. We partied that night and then I went to bed. And it was a couple of hours later that I woke up and turns out that I had sleepwalked and out a second story window and landed in a sitting position on a concrete path and I'd crushed my spine again. So I hadn't ever sleepwalked before. But this was the irony, right? That I had broken my back, and that was the reason I was there to do this bungee jump. So it was, again, it was a complicated extraction where I was in the back of the house. It was dark. I didn't know where I was. I literally couldn't see my hands in front of my face. I was screaming. I couldn't make sense of it. And they got me out of there. It was a bank. It was wet. It was slippery. And then they airlifted me to Auckland for spinal surgery. And they fused a couple of my vertebrae because I had crushed. I was very lucky again for the second time. But the area that your cord has to move in was compromised by about 60%. And I broke a wrist. But so I've used AI to tell me that I'm like 0.045% lucky to be alive, let alone walking, based on all the accidents and breakages. And so this was the accident that let me up. I got it because I felt like after the first one, and here was the irony. So, like, Harry was again for months recuperating from a spinal fusion. And I started thinking really deeply about what on earth was going on because, I don't know if you believe in God or Buddha or the universe or coincidence. But for me, I was like, this felt like a boom, boom, boom on my shoulder, like, hey, girlfriend, didn't get it the first time. Like, we are going around again. And so I'm like, well, and I actually got freaked out because I was like, I couldn't work out what this was all about. And then it started to dawn on me that my dad had always, like the little person sitting on your shoulder, like, you get 100 years on this planet, kids. You got to make the most of every one of them. And I started to think, like, change my thinking from why me to why not me? And really, it started getting into deep questions about, like, what is my purpose on the planet? Could there be more for me? And how do I leave the world a better place for me having been in it? And started to ask those kinds of questions. And then what happened in my little journey at work was that the company had started putting on like goal setting courses and leadership courses. And I'm, yes, please, yes, please. And a friend reminded me recently, she said, do you remember you were 24 and you signed up for Toastmasters? And you were quite shy and we couldn't believe it. So I had worked out that to get to grow, right? I mean, I had to get outside my comfort zone. So I started doing this and I started setting sales goals and smashing them and applying for leadership jobs and getting them. And I'd become the top consultant in New Zealand a couple of times. And then I started a business that became the most profitable, the best startups, this kind of thing. And I ended up in Toronto with the startup in Eastern Canada. And then back to New Zealand potentially to run things there. And I was shoulder tapped to head to LA to take over the running of the US operation, which was not going well. It'd been open for 12 months. So that was kind of my journey. It just started going. And so this is accessible to all of us. This is with the women that I work with, is that I started reading books like Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And, this idea of getting out of our own way. And life is short. We really don't know if we could be snuffed out tomorrow. So this whole, like, what have I got to lose? And that's kind of how I lived my life today, and like, because anything compounds. So if we're like, and I talk a lot now about women getting their hands up and speaking up, right? And this little doubt that pops up in the back of all our minds, it's like, and, it could be anything like, what if they think I'm stupid? What if, like, I open my mouth and rocks tumble out instead of this awesome idea I think is going to make a difference in the company? And so when we hesitate, we pound that and we think, we'll wait till next time, we'll wait till next time, and we'll wait till next time, and we wait till next time. And then we wonder why we don't get promoted, even if we're the top salesperson or we're in there first in the day and we're working late at night and clients love us. But these leadership skills and communication skills, they're accessible for all of us. And that idea of, getting outside our comfort zone is there for all of us to take. But the more, and so what I talk about is this deep curiosity that I started to use in both of my hospital stays helped me access, basically it meant that fear went by the wayside, because now I'm jumping ahead a little bit of my story, but I went to uni recently for the very first time to do a graduate diploma in applied psychology because I wanted to understand, what does the science say about my journey and the woo-woo and, meditating, and where does the science suggest that we can all make a difference in our lives today? And I say to people, here we are at point A in our lives, traveling along a line to point B. And, you put your hand up once, or you suggest your idea that somebody says, hey, that's good. And you shift your trajectory teeny weeny bit. But as these compound, where you end up at point C, a long way from where you would have been at point B. So going back to this deep curiosity, it lights up a part of our brain that is in direct competition with where fear lives, because only one lobe can light up at a time. So when you engage with curiosity, like as in reframing, oh my God, they're going to think I'm stupid, versus this is how I grow. What say somebody else wants to ask the question, pick your reframe, right? And you ask the question, then the fear has no place to go, because when you're staying in a place of curiosity, what say they really like this? What say this really makes a difference for the company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then, so fear and curiosity, they are competing for your attention. Fear is very accessible. In fact, for a lot of us, it's a slippery slide. It's almost like a slip and slide when we do it too often. But curiosity is also extremely accessible. And one of the things, like, do you mind me sharing a couple of stats around curiosity? Because I think this is...
Go for it.
Yeah. So from the time we're born to about 5, before we start school, right, we learn to walk and eat by ourselves, and we ask about 131,000 questions. From the time that most of us around 5, 6 start traditional school, I think, is it about 6 in Australia? 5 or 6.
Yeah, about 5.5, 6.
Yeah. So from that age until the end of primary school, which is about 5 years as well, on average, we're raising our hands about or asking about 950 questions compared to 131,000. And some kids, and we would all remember them or not, but in their last year of primary school can go a whole year without us raising our hands even once. So what's happening to that part of our brain that was so incredibly active? Schools and teachers do not have the capacity to reward the right, more questions. They reward the right answers. So we learn to become very compliant. And then you think about sort of middle or intermediate school and high school, it's the same kind of thing, less and less, right? So there's a misconception, I think, that when we're teenagers, we're not told about, well, when you become an adult, we assume, I guess, that when we become adult, we can do this and this and this and this and this. Well, it's only the compounding of, learning to drive or putting our hands up in meetings or, picking up the phone and having a conversation that we become what kind of adult we become. So this idea of, becoming really curious and re-engaging with that part of us, because, I say to people, the last time you had, 10 minutes to spare, did you pick up your phone and scroll? Or did you sit there and think about some of those ideas that you've been having? Because we have an idea, we generate an idea, and this is super conservative, every 10 seconds. So over 8,600 every day. And the law of averages, it says that every now and then one of those is going to be a game changer for you, right? Or the people in your company or, your workmates. But what are we doing with those good ideas, guys? Like that's what I sort of ask in a crowd, because we don't sit with those often enough. We've got too many sort of shiny objects. But this is it's stopping and working with people and working in that space so that when you are in those meetings and that little, you have that little self-doubt, we work through how to deal with that so that you can get yourself, I talk about getting women to the front of the pack.
Well, where we should be.
Well, I think this is, it's
alongside whoever else is in the room.
Yes.
I hope that within my grandchildren's lifetime, that this gender competition is more the competition to improve each other rather than to compete against each other.
I actually really like the way you frame that. I am not about quotas. I do not think we should have more women leaders just because they're women. I feel like what I'm trying to do is help women prepare so that when those leadership opportunities come up, they're ready for them and they're brave enough. Statistics say that men will apply for a job when they have 60% of the criteria. Women won't apply until they've got 100%. And, the world at the moment at the top is still 90% male leadership and 10% female. But looking at what's going on in the world, it could do with a slightly more better balance right now. And women
most
just
definitely
lead differently. Yeah.
Women being women, leading differently would be awesome. And also, I think that us choosing to educate ourselves, become skilled ourselves, is not at the whim of our workplace or at the whim of somebody else paying for it. It's a choice that we have, because
Absolutely.
once we've activated our reticular activation system, we will find the way to get the knowledge. We have to choose to want to have the knowledge.
I agree. And I think there's so many people with skills readily accessible these days, online. And, I have 2 coaches right now. One is for speaking. And so throughout my life, I have always sought mentors, whether I've had the capacity to pay for them or I've done courses to improve myself and my game and my leadership game and the way that I communicate in the world. And, a lot of us now, unfortunately, have the access to do a free masterclass on Instagram but how often do we actually implement that? So, yeah, I admire anybody that goes out there to grow their expertise, whether it's guitar playing or your leadership capacity or meditation. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that is the thing is choosing for yourself and then I don't know whether this is the right word, but actualizing it. So we invest time, we might invest money, but if we then don't action it, then we may as well not done the other 2 things. Because if we don't use it.
Yes. And it's very much whatever you're doing is to make sure you have an accountability buddy, I think. And, I have friends that do this with me, or even my 19-year-old son's down in uni. I said, how do you feel about how are you going with your YouTube watching? He's like, oh, yeah. So I said, well, why don't we do a 24-hour hiatus? Let's just have a challenge between the 2 of us and we'll check in this time tomorrow. And he did better than I did, but with the scrolling. And then I'm like, do you want to go again? And he's like, yeah. So, and then we were done after 2 days, just there's nothing stopping us from doing those little things at any point, but having a buddy. And I reckon anybody out there that's listening to us is like, hey, you want to do a scrolling hiatus for, every Monday for the next month, or just tomorrow, or particularly the scrolling, because I think what's happening, and unfortunately, particularly for our young women, we're scrolling about 2 to 4 kilometers a day, maybe 42 hours a week. What's happening is the science shows that when we're actually scrolling and we're commenting or we're liking or not, it puts us in a really psychologically in a position of influence and power and judgment. So when we put our devices down, we show up in the world, we have a much more judgmental focus of each other versus that curiosity piece, that, and like this perspective seeking that I encourage women, because once you go from being curious about people, then you graduate into becoming a perspective seeker, so that you and I have had some good chats, and where you just start to learn from each other, about your perspective of the world around a certain topic. And that's how we become exceptional human beings and leaders, right? When we can look at the same problem from every aspect. And we only get that from asking each other without judgment how they would solve a problem, or how do they see this problem, or what am I missing?
Absolutely. And it comes back to having those conversations, right? As part of my recovery, I've rebuilt neural pathways. And one of the things that I've been doing for a year is going to philosophy class. And this we're learning at the moment in this term, we're learning about love. And we're learning about meeting our people or our experiences as though it's for the very first time. So I recently I did a photo shoot the week before I had that lesson in philosophy. Looked at the photos. The makeup lady had not done my makeup the way I do it. I didn't like those photos. So then I got the advice, look at them as though for the first time. And I looked at them and I could see how she interpreted my face, how she interpreted what I was wearing and what would be better. And I actually ended up liking the photos.
Fantastic.
Because I had a judgment in that, I wanted my eyes to be darker or whatever. And, having that guidance with, what would a wise person do? Even thinking, now that we've created a connection between each other, I'm certain that there'll be times when I'll think of you and it'll be, I wonder what Vicky would think about this.
Well, I can
And
tell
if I listen, I'll probably hear it.
Yeah, I love that. I got the ultimate perspective lesson 2 years ago when I went to uni, and the very first assignment we had to do was to list everything, because I'm in New Zealand, everything we know about Maori, like everything, the good, the stereotypes, and then in the next column, it's like, where did you learn that? And it was a fascinating, because for those of you in Australia, I would recommend you do it with Aboriginal community. And because I'm very proud of the Maori heritage that we have here, but there's some stereotypes, and I learnt those around the dining room table, and so I had just hung on to them because right from 0 to about 8 is when we learn all of our belief patterns and behavior systems. So I had just picked that up, and I didn't realize I was hanging on to it. So then I was able to do something about it because I was given an opportunity to a perspective of how I had learned something, and that I had just been on autopilot, right? We are never too young to gain, or old to get perspectives, and it just makes our lives so much richer.
Exactly. And I think that, most of our beliefs are based from our childhood, and they were created to protect us or keep us safe in the environment we were living in to the best of the ability of those who are around us, right? But it is, as adults, it is our responsibility to question those and to look deeply at, some of those beliefs, as you did with your bungee jump, right?
Yes.
And you decided that, I do not want to accept this limitation in my life. I am going to use this methodology. Your subconscious mind had a different thought, but that's okay. I'm sure you've spoken about that to others.
Yeah.
We won't do that on this episode, but I think, if we are aware of where our bias or our beliefs are lying, and we have the curiosity to question those, and then the willingness to open up our tight circle and allow other ideas in. Not just from the media, not just from social media, not just from those who have the power to influence us, but from, those everyday communities that, the Indigenous, the immigrants, some of the most amazing people that I've met through speaking have been those who've come from other countries that have shared, first world problems, like important problems.
Yeah.
Probably I've misnamed it, but like important things, whereas we think, some of our problems are really important.
Yeah, I
But
totally
they're
understand
life
what you're
and
saying.
death problems.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. I ran an event this week called Curious Women Lead Differently, and that's the point. And because I've become quite interested in what's going on with men and women in leadership, and I found a lot of evidence to suggest that men in modern day are not consciously trying to keep women small. So if we take that off the table, then, or let's just say, there was only women leaders, we would still have this issue of some of us keeping ourselves small, right? But if we take the men issue off the table, and I started looking into what's going on, how did we get to this place? And sure, we have this history of, all the generals and the prime ministers were all male, right? I like to think, what was Mrs. Churchill doing while Winston was running the war, right? She was allowed to make the cucumber sandwiches. In fact, she was an extraordinarily intelligent woman doing a lot of work. But so we've got this history that brings us to this point. And then I started researching, what do we say to our sons versus our daughters when we're raising them? Like, what's implicit, what's unconsciously being said? And the evidence is like glaring that we do say to our boys, oh, don't worry, just get over it, go for it. Maybe you could be the captain. What about, leadership type questions? Whereas to our girls, there's a lot more language when they're younger, right? And up to the age of 8, let's be a good girl. Make sure you say your please and thank yous. And if they need help in the kitchen, or if you can just do something, don't be a problem. Call me if you get scared. And one of the women that was on this event this week, she said, you know what? I'm thinking about the way that my mother, her grandmother, talks to her, because my little girl was like, I am really good at that. And her grandma had something along the lines of, well, let's not get too full of ourselves, right? So it's really interesting I think we need to stop and think about the language, where the implicit language. I mean, ideally teachers would do it too, but certainly parents, in the way that we're raising our boys and our girls. And I am the mother of 2 boys. So the reason I'm actually working with women exclusively was, do you mind if I share this with
Oh,
you?
absolutely. I'm the mother of 2 boys.
Okay.
Both of them in leadership roles.
Oh, that's amazing. Mine are 17 and 19. So when I started this, coaching around leadership and facilitating, I was across the board. And then we did the first presidency of Trump in the USA. We were living there 20 years, and we've come back to New Zealand during COVID. So when Trump was elected the second time, I decided that night to double down on helping get women to the front of the pack, because the rhetoric that men use at a high level, and certainly politics, is very different to females. There was Duarte in the Philippines, Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Trump in the States. They did some studying during COVID, and the language that they used was able to fall under a category called warmongering. It was very divisive. It was very polarizing. Whereas a lot of other countries with women, there was a lot more explanation, collaboration. Now, I will say that pretty much it looks like, bar a couple, every government swung in the elections post-COVID, nobody got it right? That was just an impossible situation for anyone in leadership to get right for everybody on the planet. But the rhetoric that is used by a lot of men in leaderships is just not helpful. Trump's language, and no matter what you think about his politics, some good, some bad, whatever side you fall on that, I just think that women lead differently, and we could do with a slightly more collaborative approach, as you mentioned earlier, just how to work together. And here's the interesting thing. I teach it's called a GRACE framework, and women hit 3 of the 5 letters. And I do believe, and men 1, maybe 2. And what I think is important in leadership, I think in AI, once we get through AI, we go to AGI, and then we get to super intelligence. But give it 30, 40 years. If you think about it, humans could almost be the minorities on the planet. And so in meetings, which might have, I don't know if there'll be robots sitting around a table, or we'll all be doing it online, but these traits that come naturally to women around connection and curiosity and empathy and gratitude, the men are going to need to upskill on those because they won't be the smartest people in the room. And men have a need to sort of prove themselves. This is sort of goes back to our reptile brains and just they were the, the providers. So I think that women are in a good position to help men bridge this. And it's going to be a very interesting journey. So I want to make sure, like at the moment with AI, there's about 22% of people working in AI are women. So it is big tech that will drive the world forward, not governments, because the governments kind of would, right? So it's these tech companies are being run by men. So it's a really interesting development. And the reason I also think we need more women in it is just that we represent 50% of people on the planet. So we need to have our perspective heard so that whilst the balance isn't there, decisions are being made with us in place, in mind.
Well, if we're not there, we're not considered in the design, right? So
Correct.
as far as being involved with AI, as we're building, as it was very well done how they released for free ChatGPT so that we could build their engine for them by putting all our stuff in. And then the improvement is all due to us because, I've been involved in technology for the last 40 years and I can see how it's grown and how, things got called cloud so that they became mystical. And now we've got AI and robotics and all of those things. But really, they've all been around for a long time. And as automation has improved over the decades. But if we're not included in consideration for design, if women's bodies and health, thoughts, behaviours aren't considered, then we will have a skewed output because there's nothing else it can do. It can't imagine what it doesn't have as input. And which is why we still have, things like mammograms designed the way they are. And, as an
Especially
example,
with hard corners. Yeah.
yeah, and things that are not designed for people who have differing mobility issues, and it's because they haven't been included. So it's like we do have to include all of our minorities and majorities, but weight them accordingly so that we do have everybody
Yes.
considered with, because that's when we'll have
It's a good
super.
consideration.
It won't be super.
Yeah. Well, I think, I made a post that, you know, computers and robots, like, they won't, my fall or, a
Hmm?
breakup for somebody or being a boss that is, a toxic workplace environment, those won't cease to exist. A robot will never, you could program it to empathize as though it had one of those experiences, but it will never be quite the human condition, right? With the family we grew up in, the school, and all those knocks, hard life. So these soft skills, crazy important that we can, there is because it's in our brains and we can't see it, there's no instant gratification. There's a lot of people that don't spend time reflecting on this, right? But I do believe that our mental health, and I'm talking about mental health, not mental illness, will become a bigger part of the equation than our physical health. Because I think that the next step is for us to see them as one science working in harmony as opposed to separately. And then, because when you stub your toe, the pain is in your brain. And interesting, I actually just created a graph that shows that women have a lower threshold to where we feel physical and psychological discomfort. Men can go longer, but once we actually experience it, we can sustain it longer. Men shorter. So think about, you have a bad employee, and a male boss might go, well, they're not that bad. It's like the work it would take to replace them, and let's just give them a bit longer. And then when they realize they've got to go, we need to free up their future. They're like, let's do this. Like, boom, let's move on. Whereas, women will potentially ascertain the problem earlier, but also when it comes to speaking up, like we hit sooner, we feel discomfort, but we'll endure it longer and we will keep our hands down. And so this is the compounding that we as women need to, particularly women coming back into the workplace. Most of my clients tend to be like 35 to 55, and extraordinary women who would make the best employees because they're hardworking, they're resilient, they're adaptable, they're frugal, they're not going to leave the next, best thing. So loyal, but being out of the workforce, it's very easy to second guess your value, right? And so that's working with those women to help them I mirror back like how extraordinary they are.
Yeah. And that's really important. Well, I know, so I've started being unwell um, with my current chronic problem 4 years ago. But, you know, the bringing in the mental health and the physical health elements. So there is a confusion between what is diagnosable as mental health issues versus physical health issues, because they can have the same symptoms, right? So your mental health can be causing your autonomic nervous system to function in a certain way, and your dysregulated autonomic nervous system can cause yourself to feel a certain way. So it's like that chicken and egg thing.
Yes.
And with the amount of stress that we're constantly in, the fight and flight that we are constantly in, the risk of us not properly looking at the mental and physical health aspects and doing something about it, and also with the expectation of us working till we're 67 or 70 or whatever, whatever number they work out economically, we can still do until it costs the government more to look after us than they get. It's like, well, we've really got to look at in our 20s and our 30s and well before our 50s and 60s, that what is happening with our autonomic nervous system, what is happening with our immune systems, etc. Because let me tell you, once your brain, your body shuts down like mine did. I had a mini stroke. I developed epilepsy. I have dysregulated brain function and dysregulated autonomic system and autoimmune. It means that I can't have any certainty about what I can do.
Did you have a good awareness around your mental health and your physical health being connected prior to 4 years ago?
So I thought I did, but it wasn't an embodied understanding. So, and I just thought that I could think through it because I didn't show any physical problems. I wasn't obese. I didn't have the textbook presentation, but I did have childhood trauma. I did have, hardships in my life, and I was a woman fighting for her space in a male-dominated corporate environment. So if we can, for women now, if we can make that less of a battle, well, then there will be less of a strain on your health.
It's also really interesting, the language that we use. And this is such a big topic, but I think about this a bit. When we talk about our mental health versus our mental illness, and it's very easy to transpose those in there. And I think it gets confusing if this is not part of your everyday rhetoric. But I think what's happening that's concerning me is that a lot of people are identifying now as like an anxious person, or pick something, but let's talk about, whereas, so they're using psychological or medical terms to identify this, that's just the way I am in the world, as opposed to the ways those are designed. It's like, well, I have that, so okay, once you actually work that out, this is what you can do about it. So you manage that, or you may even, like, that will become a non-issue if you learn some skills. And it's become very mainstream language, and it's like, for me, it's worrisome. Younger people particularly, that will just tell you. And the neurodiversity, now that is actually being talked about more openly, I think that there is a real upside to that, because it helps people understand schools, right? To help kids if they're dyslexic, or they've got autism or ADHD. Like, I think it needs to become more readily able to be tested and diagnosed, so that, and I know it's a spectrum, so it's very difficult, but I also think that we don't need to limit ourselves based on those, right? We learn some adapting, and if it's more severe, yes, or significant, then for sure. But that's a slippery slope that worries me. And what do you think about
Especially
that?
for identifying, right?
Yes.
Because in the last 10 years or 20 years, we do use the word identify as, right? So my pronouns are, and I identify as. Well, when we start adding feeling words or behavioral words to that I am, and we keep telling ourselves it, then we believe it.
Yeah.
And
So I also think like where we lived in the States, the primary school became a green distinguished school in California because they taught the kids about recycling. So when they brought their lunch, they encouraged parents to put, snacks into little recyclable, containers, as opposed to, like you can go to the store now and you could buy, I remember seeing these boxes with 5 little things of chips and I'm like, oh, that's perfect. I can just throw a bag of chips and a little bag of biscuits. And what they said is like, they went basically, so the kids would finish their lunch and then they'd go up to the containers and they'd scrape their, stuff that would go into the compost, and anything that was recyclable went in here. And I can't remember what the third one was, but they went from 32 bags of rubbish every day down to 2. And so kids then learn to become really good at recycling and looking after the planet. So in the same way that we really need to educate them, and I don't know what you have in Australia in the way of what they're educating kids with language, so that they can talk about connection and empathy and respect and gratitude and risk and being brave and fearless and speaking up. But that's where we need to start.
Absolutely. As you were saying that, I was just thinking, yes, I want a recycling of the day, right? So let us have a look and let's go, okay. So, how did I grow? What can I scrape off into the recycling bin of my language and those
Great way to put
feelings,
it.
and learning, that, feelings only have to last a little bit of time. It's, when it lasts, longer than a minute or 16 seconds, depending on who you listen to, it is a story now. It is no longer a feeling. And so, if we are able to teach our little ones
Absolutely
about, these wonderful things, which were differently managed back in, our childhood, generations before it, because there were different inputs, different situations. But yeah, I think for our little ones to become great leaders of themselves, in their families, in their communities, and then in whatever employment is in the future, if they've got that ability to self-manage and be taught that, and it to be first nature. I was talking to someone the other day and she was saying that we often say things are second nature. And then she said, but what was before that second nature? What was our first nature?
love that.
It's like, yeah, I like that. Let us go back. So I think that we've gone through many of the questions I was going to ask, which is wonderful because I can see where you looked at the friction that existed and you decided what you were going to do about it. You were not willing to sit back and go, what are they going to do about it? It's what can I do about it? How can I learn more about this? And that from way back, before you fell in the gorge and you had that thought, I'm just very curious about how the awareness you had of the other accident that had occurred before you had your accident, and how easily the uncertainty comes in to our thinking, and then sometimes things don't go to plan. And so looking at, well, you were aware that there'd recently been an accident, so you were being extra cautious, and it still happened. And then you took control of your fear and were being extra focused on resolving that, and then another accident occurred. But what I see even more than that is your decision to be here and make a difference, and you are. And that is through obviously your boys, through your passion, through your clients and the business, and all of the people whose lives you've touched. There will be people from listening to this podcast who will get a glimmer. They will see something from our conversation that will really connect them to Vicki Tyler and to the blessing that we have had, that you survived not only long enough for your mum to arrive to see you in the hospital, but for generations of people to meet and know you. And I just am so humbled to have had this conversation today. So let us go into the lightning round of rapid reflection. So what's a belief you had to break in order to heal?
Sorry, I know you said rapid. I think that the feel the fear and do it anyway, I just circle back to that so often. It applies to all of us.
It is Susan Jeffers.
Yes.
Fantastic book.
I bought it again recently, the original, because I wanted to see why it had such an impact on me in my early 20s. I recommend it to anybody. It's a simple book, very it makes such good sense. It's like, go out there, go get it, go get life. Yeah.
Just
even,
have a go.
Even more relevant now with social media.
Yes. Buy the book, not the not the Kindle. Buy the book.
And then you can scribble all over it. That's what I do to my books.
Exactly. Well, my dogs decided that they wanted to have a chew. So mine is very special. I still have it, the chewed version.
You have it too? Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah, no, one of my first, when I started studying human behavior, was one of my first books.
Love that.
Okay, next question. What's one thing you now trust in yourself that you didn't before?
Where I immediately go with that is that I will speak up for people when they're not feeling brave enough to speak up for themselves. Yeah, I encourage people to, but otherwise I will have your back. If I see a wrong being done to somebody, typically about the way they're being treated, that feels like there's something driving me that I will do that.
Yes, I am a lioness. I absolutely like that, especially in the workplace. I would definitely stand up for people who I thought were being overlooked, misunderstood, or treated badly.
Treated badly or spoken down to or treated with respect or overlooked. I don't know if you've heard Richard Branson talk about this, but he would take, high management, potential employees out for a meal. What he really was watching was how they treat the staff, the waiters and the bus boys and things. Yeah, I love that.
Yes, he's a very interesting man. Okay, next question. When was the last time you laughed at something that used to make you cry?
Oh, that's a really hard one, actually. Gosh, I would say what comes to mind there is that I don't take myself so seriously anymore. And I think being a mum of boys, teenage boys, they would have to fall somewhere in there.
Yes, well, as my boys are in their 30s and I'm, grandmother of 2, yes, it is a special gift to have boys. Okay, right, last question. What does leadership look like on the inside, not just the outside?
Oh, you're speaking right to my heart there. Well, that's kind of where it starts. I mean, I think you mentioned something earlier that resonated with me about leadership, even of ourselves. So I think I started in my early days. It was just standing solid on the ground, your own 2 feet, just stacked in your own body and feeling comfortable in your own skin. And then you can show up authentically, even if it's shy or vulnerable, which are some of the best traits of leaders as well. As much as that for years, it took me a long time to work that out. Makes you more relatable, more human, but just being comfortable in your own skin. And that requires some work. I do self-hypnosis and meditation every morning now, like I have been for the last, committed to getting up at 5 a.m. and doing this. So I'm about month 3 because mine was very higgledy-piggledy before that. And the inner work takes work. And because we don't see the immediate, bicep, but it's like training a bicep, it's the same thing, but being comfortable in our own skin so that we treat each other well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, my coaching brand was building your mindset muscle, and it is very much about one series of thoughts at a time.
Yes, and the compounding is huge.
That self-nurturing and self-loving. Okay. So, thanks listeners for today. Vicky's story is a reminder that sometimes we need to leap into fear, into growth, into the unknown, to reclaim what was lost in a fall. From being airlifted to safety, to free falling by choice, from breaking bones to breaking bias, Vicky shows us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stumbles, recalibrates, and jumps anyway. If this episode has stirred something in you, a fear to face, a pattern to break, a curiosity to follow, let it. That stirring might just be the invitation to become someone braver. Vicky, thank you for your wisdom, your grit, and your story. And to all of you listening, stay curious, stay kind, and keep going, because life may get suddenly different, but that does not mean it's over. It might just be beginning. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This has been Suddenly Different. I'm Leigh-Anne Charland, and I'm so grateful you shared your time with me. If you felt a spark, a tear, or a moment of recognition, I hope you'll pass that gift along by sharing this show. Take a deep breath, trust your path, and I'll meet you back here soon.